right, everybody. Welcome to episode number 161 of Sports Cards Live. It is Saturday night, November the 19th, 2022, and my name is Jeremy Lee. I would like to thank Andy Friedman for joining us on Sports Cards Live, what was now 2 weeks ago. I also want to thank Adam Gray and Karn Rye for joining 2 nights ago for the PWCC Premier Auction Watch Party. We had record viewership. That was awesome. Thanks, everybody who joined us. Later tonight, we will have an episode of After Hours. My Expo show partner, Sam Genova, will be joining us. We'll be talking about the Expo, doing some Q&A and showing off our pickups, why we picked them up, why we love these cards, and so forth. Tomorrow on Collectible Live, our guest will be Brett Charville of Standard Gaming. We'll be going live 7 p.m. Eastern on the Sports Cards Live YouTube channel. And next Saturday, our guest on this show on Sports Cards Live is none other than Chris Sewell, baseball card collector, investor, dealer, in that order. He will be coming back for the second time on the show. It's been over a year since he's come on. All right, I'd like to shout out the Center Stage app. Download the app in the App Store for quick comps, whether you're pricing cards for sale at a card show or shopping yourself. The app is continuously improving, so please join me in supporting the great team that they have over there and the innovation that they are undertaking. Also, shout out Leighton Sheldon with Just Collect. He'll be joining us shortly this evening for the Vintage Update segment. Also, want to thank everybody who came by the tag grading booth at the Toronto Expo and submitted cards. Appreciate everyone who's willing to give us a try, and we're grateful for that. Also, want to thank everybody who came out to Jack Astor's the Thursday before Sport Card Expo. We had record attendance there. 75 or so people came out. We had a great time. Look forward to doing that again at the spring show for the Toronto Expo. Again, thanking all of our loyal viewers, podcast listeners. If you're not yet subscribed to the channel, please take a moment and do so. Greatly appreciate that. And as always, tonight, your comments, your questions are in play. So don't be shy. Feel free to pop them into the chat. We'll get to as many as we can. Let's get to it for tonight. Tonight's guest started working in sports card stores in 1991. His favorite products were 89 Upper Deck, 90 Leaf, and 91 Stadium Club. If you're like me and you lived in that era, you know exactly what that feeling was like. Oh gosh, great memories. In 2011, he co-founded a toy store in Vegas, which led to his work on Pawn Stars on the History Channel in 2014. In 2021, he started working at Gameday Sports Cards in Las Vegas. His favorite teams are the San Diego Padres, the Chargers, the Vegas Golden Knights, and his favorite athletes are Tony Gwynn, Dan Marino, LaDainian Tomlinson, and Eric Lindros. Originally from San Diego and currently hailing in Las Vegas, let's bring him out. Steve Johnston, welcome to Sports Cards Live, pal. How are you?
Very good, Jeremy. Thanks for having me on, and what an intro! Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Hey, let's get some hype happening here. We met. Gosh, I guess I don't even know when I first met you. Was it Burbank? Was it Del Mar? But whenever it was, I knew you'd be a great guest. You've got a lot of insight, a lot of experience, history in this hobby, and then when we actually got to planning and getting to some in-depth discussion, I realized that, wow, this is going to be a good episode. People are going to want to watch this and maybe pick up a few nuggets from you. So let's jump right in and set the context for kind of, why and how you have this experience, these insights, this knowledge. Tell us a bit about your hobby history from the beginning and take us through till maybe joining Gameday.
Well, I have to tell you, first off, I became a collector because of my mom. So I was a yard sailor when I was a kid. I understood that I could sell my toys and go buy other toys. And that kind of spurred me into the interest of collecting. And I got into sports cards. And when I got into sports cards, I quickly was like, how can I work this out? So I went to work in a sports card shop. It was actually La Mesa Sports Cards in La Mesa, California. I used to ride my bike about 2 miles each way every day. And I worked on trade. And so I would trade for what I thought were the best products in the store. And I quickly could amass, big cards like Griffey rookies and Frank Thomas rookies and Chipper Jones and at the time, Phil Plantier, which was a Padres thing. And I really kind of took off, and I had my hustles. So I put on, Monopoly nights at the store, home run derbies, things that I could always beat everybody in. So that way, like, I could take advantage of it. And I did that. And then from there, I started to get into Hot Wheels, into die-cast cars. I really kind of had an affection for cars as well. I had a 78 Chevy Nova was my first car. And so I was really interested in that. And I found that was a very lucrative world for me. I could buy multiples upon multiples of those cars and resell them to people. And so I started doing that. And then that what became a passion project and my interest turned into more of a business. When I moved to Vegas in 2004, I brought my collection with me, and I met some people that I started hunting toys for. And when I started hunting toys for them, I was doing it on the side. It was no big deal. But in 2006, I got talked into selling 2 items I thought I'd never sell, which was a mint unopened sealed in the box Optimus Prime and a mint unopened sealed in the box Megatron. And it was right after grading had started at AFA, which started in 2005. And I kept having the same collector ask me for these pieces. And finally I said, look, told myself, if I'm going to sell these items, everything's for sale. And then that's what happened. And there we were. And so I sold those items, and I fell into becoming a toy dealer. And from there, it snowballed, opened a store, then made my relationship with Pawn Stars. And then, unfortunately, due to a divorce, I left the business a year and a half, 2 years ago, and a year and a half ago. And I came on with Gameday, and I think I found a great spot for me to land. I kind of get to come back full circle, come back to my sports card roots. And when I met Jimmy and his team over at Gameday, what I really liked is that they were very community oriented. They had a really, really fun vision for the future. They really wanted to engage the hobby space, and it kind of became a good spot for me to land. So.
Oh, right on. Well, we'll get into some Pawn Stars talk. We'll get into what's going on at Gameday. And just so everyone understands, Gameday Sports Cards is it's an LCS. It's in Las Vegas. How old is the shop? How long has Jimmy had that shop for now?
So the shop's been open about a year and a half. We're located in Henderson, across from the Raiders practice facility. Jimmy was kind of foreshadowing when he built the store. He put it in a little bit more of a building area where it wasn't necessarily a thoroughfare, and it's starting to become that. The area is budding and building, and so that was kind of his game plan. And then at the same time, Jimmy actually came in 2016. He started doing breaks and came from that side of the world. So he was one of the bigger breakers on the platforms like Facebook, and had his own group and everything. And so kind of brought that in. And that's actually how I met Jimmy. Was I got involved with his breaks, being a sports card collector. I got involved with some breaks, and he and I started talking business. And from there, that's how our relationship started.
Okay, right on. So it sounds to me, just from your history, you spoke a lot more about toys than cards. Are you a lifelong card collector, or more of just a lifelong collector? Can you sort of just set that context for me?
Well, so I had a couple different periods of times where I had sell-offs, right? I don't think this happens with all collectors. I think the type of collector I'm a little bit more of an investment collector. I think there's different tiers of collectors. And as an investment collector, you look for opportunities in the market. I just did a mass sell-off again of a lot of my personal sports cards. I sold 90% of my big cards in the last 6 months because I was foreshadowing this fall in the market and didn't want to be left behind with it. And I didn't have anything I couldn't replace in 2 years if I wanted to go back and rebuy it. So, I made those moves. And I've done that throughout time. And that happened with sports cards. So I really have always loved sports. I played sports. I played baseball. I was very, very, involved with sports cards. But I probably fell off from sports cards in about 2004, 2005 to about 2010. I kind of took off this period of time where I really wasn't buying anything. I had stuff set aside, stuff put away. And then I kind of got back into it, and I really got heavy back in 14. And in 2014, I was buying, shout out to Legacy Sports Cards. I probably, kept them in business with the amount of Contenders product that I bought in 2014. But I started buying cards again in 14, 15, 16, real heavy. I probably should have went one more year and gotten into the Mahomes rookie year, and didn't get as heavy there. But I was really like doing that. I was amassing stuff, setting it to the side, putting it to the side, and then again, another bit of a sell-off. When there was a slight uptick in the market, I saw an opportunity to sell a bunch of stuff I had. So I unfortunately, I'm the collector that kind of chases the parked car, and I get it. And once I get it, I don't know what to do with it. So then I sell it and I start again.
So you mentioned that you took a bit of a break there from 04 to 2010. And I think that's interesting because I think a lot of collectors do that. I've often said that I sort of slowed down from about 95 to 2000 after being, gung ho from like as a kid in 1980 through till now. And I highlight that just because I think that I want to send the message. It's okay to take a break every so often, whether you're taking a break for a day from social media. It's funny, hey, Steve, because now, a 2-day break from the hobby being social media might feel like what was a 1-year break before. You're probably missing as much content in 2 days now as you did in a year back then, actually. But I think it's important to kind of underscore that it's okay to take a break from the hobby if you feel that you need that. So I just wanted to highlight that point right there. You also mentioned tiers of collectors. You called yourself an investment collector. And I often put my hands up like this. I say you've got investors here, you've got collectors here, and we all fall somewhere in between. I'll say there's no extremes on either end, although there might be some, real outliers that are. But when you talk about a tier of collector, can you just expand upon kind of what you mean by that, just to see if it's consistent with what I'm thinking, or perhaps you'll throw out an idea, a concept that I haven't contemplated, and maybe I'll work it in and make it one of my theories.
Well, I look at it, collectors. So I want to write a book. I want to write a book about the collector's mentality. But I believe that there's the investment collector, which purely looks at everything they purchase as an investment, looks at opportunities to sell it. They're more like a day trader in stocks, right? There's the value collector, the person that buys it for long-term value, right? But their ultimate goal is to sell it. And then there's the person that buys it for the personal collection, or a personal collector. And I believe those three different areas are strategically different. And the reason they are is because when you go the value collector, the guy that is going to put it away for a long period of time, he doesn't worry about those immediate peaks and valleys in the card. He's always looking for term on it. Guys I would use, for example, on that right now are players like Ben Roethlisberger or Tom Brady, guys that you're going to buy into, and until they get their bust in the Hall of Fame, you're not doing anything different with their cards. That's what that collector looks for. Whereas right now in this market is so volatile with what have you done for me lately, right? Mm-hmm. That the investment collector, he's having a tough time right now because he's constantly trying to move through everything. He's constantly trying to move through product and make the most value out of it. And a lot of our influencers are actually these guys. They're the investment collectors. And that's the portion of the market I think most of the people try to fall into, but I don't think they realize who they really are until you actually take a step back and really look at it. See, I know I'm an investment collector. I don't have a PC. Everything is available for sale. I will sell it. I may not want to. I may have a piece that I really like. I may have something that I really like, but there's nothing that I've ever said at this point. Once I sold those toys, everything became for sale.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. That's a great way to break it down. Actually, when you said, that the hobby, a lot of the hobbies about what have you done for me lately right now, I snickered. Leighton Sheldon's joined us in the back room. I can see he snickered at the same time when you said that. I think we all recognize that is the case. We're going to bring Leighton out in just a couple minutes. We haven't gone to comments yet, said hello to everybody. I want to do that. I'm going to start at the bottom here. Chris C says, I'm a collector. I buy and hold most everything, goats, sealed wax, and I look long-term always. That's pretty close to my approach right there. Contender, welcome, says Steve, please write a book. The hobby needs it. And hey, while I'm here, I'll say to you, Steve, if you need somebody to write the foreword, I'd love to be involved because I think I'm with Contender. We need it. And even if I'm not involved, I'll still read the book, of course. We did that one there. Sorry about that. No, we didn't. Chris says I took a 15-year break from 02 although I had other things to deal with, but with more than made up for it in the last 6 years. Yeah, it's been easy to make up for it in the last 6 years. That's for sure. Back to the top, though, we got Chris C in the house. We got Lashwine. What's going on? Joe Rab says it was another great Toronto Expo. It really was. Lashwine loves Chris Sewell. Again, he will be our guest next Saturday on the show. We got the Currency Project in the house. What's going on, fellas? Chris C says, are there any affordable 90s or 2000s hockey rookies you like, Jeremy? I don't have much hockey, but I'm curious to ask you about that era. Great to hear. Chris Sewell will be back on. And yeah, there are all the rookies from the 90s in hockey, I think, are pretty affordable. Chris, let's save that for after hours and definitely talk about it later on tonight. Jeff McMahon in the house. Yeah, I had a killer expo. Again, we're going to do after hours tonight after this show. It's going to be all about the expo. I'll tell all the stories. Albert Jones, what's going on? Diamond Pocklington's back in the house. Good to see you again. Chris says, I just found cards and a bases loaded baseball console game at Walgreens and the memories of playing that game growing up. No doubt. Perk in the house. What's going on? Mark Santucci. Toronto was awesome. If you guys aren't going to be able to stay up late enough to watch after hours after this show, you can always watch it on the channel later on. Speaking of after hours, that's Sam. He'll be joining me on the show. He was at my booth all weekend in Toronto, and we spent some great times together. Daniel in the house, Frank Estella, and Mark Santucci just grabbed a Derek Jeter rookie 98 nameplate for $15 in the New York area. Congratulations. And okay, so Colin Murray says everything is for sale, and I know he had a serious booth at Expo. And Perk says nothing wrong with taking breaks a day, a week, a month, whatever you need. Whatever a break means to you, that last sentence is what I think is the important one. Whatever works for you. That's a nice thing about this hobby, Steve. We don't have to answer to anybody except ourselves, maybe our wives, maybe our husbands, maybe that kind of thing. But otherwise, we don't have to answer for anyone. We don't have to answer to anyone as for why we collect what we collect or why we like what we like. Gross Bros, huge fan. Expo is huge. Yes, it was. Lash Wine says, is it just me or do you find that some pure collectors tend to frown on investment collectors? Curious what your thoughts are on that. Let's hang on to that question. We'll do that after the vintage update segment. And Junk Wax Museum, welcome, says SCL, best Saturday night show out there. Thank you so much. Greatly appreciate that. Steve, before we bring out Leighton, any comments on anything I just ran through before we do that?
I mean, I'll definitely touch base on the collectors, like mindset on the investment collectors. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And the reason I do is because the general collector looks at that as someone who drives the market value up on their PC items. It's always when it touches their PC. When it's someone else's PC, they're not too worried about it unless they have it and could trade it for theirs. See, and that's the catch-22 with the personal collector, is that guy utilizes that opportunity to turn that into cards for himself, utilizing the investor collector's mentality. And it's an interesting take because I know that when I first started, it wasn't so heavy where you would be buying to like facilitate your collection. And now everybody does it. All three of those collectors buy to trade and or sell to facilitate what their game plan is to their collection.
Yeah, no, that's well said, and it explains why I started setting up at card shows. It's if you can make a few bucks on a card, put it into your PC, finance the PC pickups was how I used to put it. All right, let's bring on Leighton Sheldon from Just Collect. We're now doing a weekly vintage update. Leighton is a vintage expert out there. He's active in the community, active in the hobby, and just an all-around great guy. Leighton, there he is. Welcome back. How are you doing? I can't wait to hear what you want to talk about tonight, but what do you have to open up with?
Well, first off, gentlemen, thanks for having me. Steve, it's great to meet you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Leighton, and legend in the hobby. It's always nice to share the same space with someone like that.
Oh, appreciate the kind words. I wanted to make a comment briefly about, I was listening and found it fascinating, you talking about different collectors. And I think you could probably add into that maybe like a fourth category, of which my guess is most of us will never be a part of. And it's the category where I don't give an F, meaning I have so much money, right? Like a Jim Irsay, like a Ken Kendrick, where they legitimately could probably fit all of those different categories at some point in their life, meaning A, B, and C. But the reality of it is they're a D, because they're fully in acquisition mode. They're probably so busy business-wise, they're actually having someone facilitate their bidding, getting catalogs, letting them know an auction start and end. And so I think the point is, you were talking about how the collector, mentality is someone who, even when they have to finance their own PC, they're looking at the card show, the way you started, Jeremy. And I think that's kind of the point, is that that's what everything has, that's what every collector has in common. No matter where you stand, you basically want that kind of D collector type of money, meaning Jim Irsay, Ken Kendrick, etc. But the reality of it is, none of us get there. So we're all finding a means to an end in terms to finance. Call it the hobby, call it your habit, call it anything in between. But I just thought that was really interesting, the way that you laid out the different groups of folks that are out there, buying for investment, collection, PC, etc.
Well, that collector is always going to fall into a realm of one of those three. However, there's a lot more categories. Like, for example, I mentioned what I call the hound dog, right? The hound dog chases it down until they have it. Once they have it, then they have to sell it because they don't know what to do with it. They got to get something new. The collector you're talking about, I call the Hail Mary. So the guy that can always snap the ball and throw the Hail Mary, and whether it gets intercepted or it's touchdown, it doesn't matter because it doesn't hurt his pocketbook. He can move on to the next thing, and it doesn't matter. So there's subcategories to every single one of those. It's finding what area of the hobby space you fit into to be able to understand. I actually think it's important for collectors to understand this, because if they do, they're going to be a lot more conscious of actually where they should be in the collector space, and not bouncing all around. Because the guys that bounce all around, those are the guys that turn around 6 weeks later and come in and say, I spent too much money, I don't know what I was doing, whatever it is. And I hate to see that be the case. My goal ultimately in the hobby is, if we can educate people and help them be better in the hobby space, let's do it.
Absolutely. I build up their confidence, they'll be here for the long stay. Totally agree.
Well said, fellas. Well, I love this interaction. I'm sitting here like just soaking it all up. So if I'm sitting here soaking it all up, I'm sure the audience is benefiting greatly from both your knowledge and experience. So Leighton, as part of what we're doing here with this vintage update segment now on Sports Cards Live, and it's fun for me because I don't necessarily know what you're going to talk about. It's fun that way, but you're always going to come with a story or a lesson or something like that. So I'm going to open the floor to you, and I'm excited to hear what it is that you wanted to talk about tonight.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to do it, Jeremy. So appreciate you giving me the chance. So the first thing I want to touch upon with the few minutes that we have here is, I've been bidding actively in auctions the last few days. Like I'm sure many of you that are out there that are watching the show now live and on replay are doing, meaning PWCC, Heritage, Collect, and probably eBay and anything in between. And so the specific part of the market I wanted to comment on as far as vintage was actually vintage unopened. And what I mean by unopened is, packed boxes, I guess in some situations, cases, but they're virtually non-existent as far as vintage wax goes. And so the first thing I would say is prices are still very strong. However, the outliers, the items that if they were in my possession and I would consider auctioning, meaning like you have all the upside of the auction, probably not a lot of downside as far as unopened, is the rare one-of-a-kind items that maybe a couple of years ago used to see a lot, but now they're only auctioned every several years. So it seems to me that those kinds of items are still garnering substantial premiums, even though everyone who's kind of in tune to the market knows prices in general right now are down. However, what I found with unopened, like I said, is that the market is fairly stable. And the only reason I can say that is I bid on tens of thousands of dollars of wax in the last few days, and I won a few items, but nothing to write home about. Like a 1979 basketball box, like some 80s wax, a mid-70s football box. But, I was the underbidder on a 7-figure basketball box and a bunch of other basketball that was in collect. And so the point being is that even when, the market is down, if you know a particular niche like vintage and open that I have experience in, it still can be a situation where finding a bargain can be difficult. So don't get hung up on that. Hey, for example, you love vintage unopened. Well, if you also collect photography and cards, maybe if unopened hasn't gone down the way that you like and the investment opportunity isn't there for you, just take your efforts and move them elsewhere. Or to be fair, just take your cash and keep it on the sideline. But that was my 2 cents about vintage unopened the last few days. I was personally looking for a discount. Just, being transparent, I was hoping for between, let's say, 15 and 30% off, and I didn't really see it. I found a few items that cracked through fell through the cracks, but in general, it seemed like prices were very solid, and in some cases, actually strong.
So despite the state of the market right now and a lot of the narrative that we read and see out there on social media, you're saying that the vintage unopened category is holding pretty strong, no discounts available. One of the things that I think people understand, and they should, especially, you have a store, you have a business called Just Collect, but you also have Vintage Breaks. So you buy this vintage product to do vintage breaks, I'm guessing. Every time you or anybody else opens up an unopened vintage product, again, a pack, a box, or a case, you are reducing the overall supply and population of that item. And so you would think basic economics, supply and demand, that should increase the value. So while you say you're looking for a discount, really it should be going up in price every auction that these items keep coming, with the adjustments for the general economy, of course. Steve, your thoughts on vintage wax, and do you see a lot of it in at game day? Is it something that your customers ask for? How can you sort of jump in and let us know your thoughts?
Well, the first part of it, the part of the market that you see a lot is that 90s wax era, unfortunately. The late 80s to 90s. It's just everybody sat on that because they were all forecasting that it was going to be worth millions, and everybody kept it sealed. But I'm where Leighton is in the vintage market, that I never suspect in a downturn like this that your real vintage items, it doesn't matter what area you're in, sports cards, coins, comics, toys, it doesn't matter, that you always have a little bit more stability in it. That's the thing. Not as much upside. A lot of times you don't have the big booms in vintage like you do in other card markets or other, collectible markets, but you have more stability in it. And that's where Leighton's seeing right now, is that market's showing stability in a very volatile time for cards. It's down. It's down overall. It really is. It's still probably down in that 30 percentile, 25 percentile, but it didn't take that 65% dip that a lot of the card market saw. And the reason it didn't is because there's cards that are just kind of substantiated as the staples of what they're going to be. And those products drive off of those card values, and they always kind of stay in the range. Like 86 Fleer is always going to be expensive. Sure, it's 30% less than what it was at the peak right now, 40% less, but it doesn't take those huge, massive drop-offs like it does in the modern market. And that's because the modern market is liquid to most people. Most people are willing to just start getting out of it and put more and more of it into the marketplace quickly. You don't find it that way with vintage.
Yeah, no, well said and agreed. Leighton, before you respond to that, we have a bunch of comments and questions coming in from the chat. One of the discussions that the chat is having right now is, what is vintage? We know it goes back as far as cards go, but where does it end? I'm going to put and this is another one. When I said earlier, no one can tell you what to collect, I also think no one should be able to tell you how you define vintage. And it seems like the longer you've been into vintage, the further back you define vintage to end. Leighton probably thinks it ends in 1972, like a lot of people do. I don't know exactly, Leighton. I'm just saying that because you're so involved. For me, vintage ended when Upper Deck came out and put holograms and changed the paper stock. To me, that's kind of, and gum went away out of packs for all intents and purposes. I consider for my collection vintage to be anything before 1990. Leighton, what is your definition of vintage?
Well, I'll address vintage cards versus vintage wax because it's two completely different animals, right? You can get vintage cards from the 1910s, like T206s, E90s, OBAC, etc. You're not getting any unopened really from the 1910s. And so as far as vintage cards go, on the buying and selling side, meaning it's from an investment side, a dealer side, if you will, I really consider it from the 1960s and earlier. However, just like you said, Jeremy, I grew up with so much great stuff from the 70s and 80s. It's hard to think that Joe Montana rookie's not vintage. It's just that it's not as old as, let's say, a Mickey Mantle card. And so there's plenty of cards I still hold near and dear in my heart from the 70s and 80s, and that are quite valuable. But for vintage wax, I feel a little bit different. Vintage wax to me is really anything from the 1970s and earlier. Whereas in 1970s cards, singles are a lot easier to come by, but wax, absolutely different animal. And so therefore, if you kind of look at like the 1980s, although there's a lot of junk wax in the late 80s, there's a lot of great stuff from the early to mid 80s. And I'm not even talking super expensive, like a 3-box 83 Topps baseball rack case. That's not super expensive, but yet there's people who are actively buying that now, and they're not looking to ever sell it, or they're going to sell it in 10, 20, or 30 years from today. And so I think the 1980s right now, if anything, is very interesting as far as vintage wax goes.
Yeah. Okay, final question for you, Leighton, from the chat. Comes from Sasha. He says, what vintage wax was readily available 3 to 5 years ago, but much rarer now?
Oh, it's very easy for me to, because I'm looking for it right now, is basically mid-1970s basketball. There used to be a 76 Topps tall boy, a 75 basketball, and a 74 basketball box in every collect auctions, which has an affiliation with Larry Fritsch. Every auction they would have a box. And I bought for years. And, I'm like, oh, I have an extra, I have enough. I don't need one from this auction. And lo and behold, they stopped auctioning them. My supply dwindled. And now I'm like, oh, dear, I really need some more vintage 1970s basketball wax.
So there you go. It's cool that you actually had an answer ready to go for that. So good stuff, and thanks to the question asker, who I've lost the comment at this moment, but thanks for asking that question. And Leighton, great to see you again. Thank you so much, and we'll have you back next Saturday for another segment of the Vintage Update. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving to you and your families. Take care.
See you later.
Thanks. All
right, Steve. So let's get back to it. Lots of comments have been coming in. I do want to get to them. There's a lot of great ones. I'm going to navigate through this debate between what is vintage, and I do see there's one. I think Mark is saying 48 to 80 is vintage. So for me, I say 48 to 90. But he goes on to say before that is pre-war, and to me, they're kind of like you can use the interchangeable terms, but maybe I need to start to be a little bit more specific and separate for me pre-war from vintage. I think I'm going to really consider doing that. That makes sense to me as Mark puts out there right now. So, okay, we're going to run through some more comments here, Steve, and then we're going to talk about your work with Pawn Stars. I think that's pretty exciting stuff. So, first off, Chris C says vintage anything pre-1990. So yeah, that makes sense to me. That's where I'm at. We have people saying sorry to each other. I guess we're not getting along. We got to be getting along in here, everybody. Let's be getting along. I'm just kidding. I know that we are. Chad Shipper in the house. What's going on? Happy Sports Cards Live. Good to see you, buddy. Good to see you. Chris C says call it modern vintage. Then the point is 82. Topps Ripken is 40 years old now. Yeah, I think again, I'm going to go back to what I said before, everybody. I don't know if there's a rule for this. I don't think we're ever going to have a consensus. I think it's kind of what you want. Contender says, shouldn't vintage be 30 years and older? Just like an antique has to be 100 years old by definition, maybe vintage needs a definition. I know a lot of people, Steve, use the wine definition for vintage, which I don't remember what that is, but it might be 30 years or 20 or 15. I'm not sure. So, but that does make sense. Jerry says, I started collecting in 79, so vintage to me will always be the original 6 hockey and earlier. And that's just it to me, he says. And I definitely agree with that and that approach for sure. Brendan Ryan says, just look at the chaos in opinions without an updated scale of vintage to modern. Cards older than 75 years should have an antique, not vintage designation. Yeah, I mean, there's something to that as well. Chrissy, yeah, not everyone shares the same definition. Sanderson to Orr, that's Eric says, I have to, well, of course you got to agree with me, Eric. No, I'm just kidding, buddy. Thank you. That anything before 1990 is considered vintage. And again, we can have that. And Lashwine, always enjoy Leighton's insight. Yes, great to have him jump on. Steve, anything else about all this that came to mind as I've been addressing the comments before we jump into some Pawn Stars talk?
Well, it's funny to me because I have a little bit of a different look at this because of how all collectibles are done. The sports card market is really unique. Comic books has a very, very outlined benchmark. You have Golden Age, Bronze Age, right? Like it's very, very, very laid out and easy to follow. I think that in the sports card world, maybe there should be a designation put together that is something that is a little easier to follow, something that does offer a vintage modern to a modern, right? Because in general speaking, in collectibles, 50 plus years is generally considered antique because 100 plus years is going to be considered relic, right?
Oh, okay.
So So you've got 50 plus years, and then generally in most collectibles, 20 plus years is considered vintage. It's supposed to be a childhood or a, getting into your adulthood time period that should be. And again, these are all, we're all speculative across. So that's where I say, when you're saying 1990, I'm saying, well, maybe that should be vintage modern era. And then before that could be vintage, and then you can get an antique relic, but really create these designations. I think it would be helpful for people, because I do think there is a little bit of a disconnect there of people of what they think is vintage and what is not. Because if we ask someone who's 25 in the chat, what is vintage, they're going to tell you what they got as a kid compared to what you and I got as a kid, compared to maybe what someone who may be, 20, 30 years older than you or I might think. So
yeah, it's hard for me to consider a Kobe rookie to be vintage, but it's easier for me to consider, a Mark McGuire rookie to be vintage, or a Jerry Rice, or a Joe Montana, or a Michael Jordan Fleer for that matter. All right, couple more comments here. James says most antique dealers consider an item to be vintage if it is at least 40 years old. I think you just said 20 or 30, so there's some consistency there. And based on what you were just saying, I think what we're talking about is like just a standardization so that everyone can have the same reference. There's no confusion, no misunderstandings. Sasha says the definition of vintage has always been evolving, but hard to see Upper Deck and that new cardstock with holograms becoming vintage. I sort of, not yet anyway, but so 40s to 90 might be the final range. I mean, I would vote for that, but I think again, in 20 years, 1990s will be vintage as well. Brendan Ryan says, would be nice to see Steve get a sports card show on the History Channel. Hey, I guess if anyone can do it, it might be you, Steve, considering you already have relationships at the History Channel, which we're going to talk about right away. Pocklington says, pre-serial numbered cards are vintage to me personally. I'm an 80s baby, so what I grew up with is vintage. Yeah, that makes sense. And we have Chris agreeing, and I think we kind of do agree on that. Let's talk about Pawn Stars, man, because it's pretty cool. You're actually the second Pawn Stars expert I've had on Sports Cards Live. The first was one of my earliest guests, Steve Grad. He comes in and opines on the authenticity of autographs. And what Steve will do on the show that I know the Beard of Knowledge doesn't do this. Rebecca, the old book expert, would never do. I don't know if she would do it too. But Steve will actually not only opine on the authenticity of the autograph, but he will also opine on the value of the item for Rick and the Pawn Star guys to decide, do they want to buy it at the asking price? So again, you're the second guy coming on. I'm going to start with that question. When you do your appearances on Pawn Stars on the History Channel, do you opine on the value of the item versus just just the authenticity?
So I do both, and I really focus on toys and pop culture memorabilia. So that's really the strengths of my background. And the sports cards is obviously a strength of mine. However, when I came on, they had an expert, then they changed. And for TV purposes, it's not great to have the same expert doing multiple, genres of items. It's better to have an individualized person for each one. And I do appreciate that they do that. With that said, I really focus on the historical aspect when I come onto the show. To me, the most important element of the entire thing is what information I can provide you on that item to give you some type of historical relevance, some type of information about it, or what really might genuinely be something unique to the item. And that's whether it's something that is just 20 years old or something that's hundreds of years old. And so I really look at that, but we do have to assess the value, and the simplicity for me of that is that is Rick's money. And I need to make sure that when he's buying an item that I don't steer him to overpay for something. And I can't say that never happened on the show before. And I can't say that, it doesn't look like that happened with myself, because the magic of TV is sometimes you film something, but it doesn't come out for a year and a half. So when you see it the first time, it actually market may have changed tremendously, but on TV at the time when we did it, I kind of wish they would like put some timestamps with it. Like this episode is from so you could reference it back. But With that said, I think it's very important for me to focus on the fact that, whatever the actual market value of something is, to make sure that I'm giving a fair and good assessment, something that I'm there for the buyer too. Don't get me wrong. Like a lot of people, I think they have that opinion of like, we come in to help Rick and them like get a deal. And that's not it at all. We come in and we want to make sure that we're giving the best information about the item, because it's not just about what it's worth. It's not just about what the item is. Is the item sellable? Is there a market for it? What is the market for it? How hard is it going to be able to sell? What are the channels we're going to suggest that they are going to need to sell it on? Because that all factors into what the cost of doing business is. When you own a business license, building, lights, employees, that cost of doing business is factored into every single thing you purchase.
I guess, if you were to go on the show and provide your opinions and they were skewed towards favoring Rick and the gold and silver pawn shop, I mean, the public would catch on pretty quick because, there's several experts out there in the fields there that are watching as well and kind of, marking in their brains, what was his opinion about it? Now, there could be other people who think that the value is different, but they may still respect your opinion. And there might be other people out there who say, well, he's just full of crap. There's no way it's worth that. And that's when you would be kind of busted. And that would not end well, would it?
Well, no, and we see that. So the first thing I'll tell you is that someone who collects something is generally more of an expert about it than I am. See, they apply the expert tag, not me. I come in to provide a marketplace relevancy to the items. Is it something that can be sold? Is it something that's worth for them to invest into? Is it something that will bring excitement? And also, does it have a marketing element for the shop? Because there's an element to that. And you're right. When we come in and we make an assessment, someone may have a difference of opinion. I see it often. It's the guy that's been in the business forever, that's all he does and buy and sells that one item. And then all he thinks about is just the walls that item spaces in. And when he does that, he doesn't realize that new people being brought into the collector community, how they react differently because they're in a different time. Let's say younger collectors in the sports card hobby, how they buy and sell and trade. These things are all very important to factor in when you're talking about what the actual ability to sell the item is. And then the point to touch on, and I'll use this example because this is a really fresh example. I evaluated a Funko Pop Stan Lee that was a Comic Con exclusive. It was a metallic version that they did. It was a custom paint exclusive item that they did. And I get knocked for this a lot. I still see comments. I saw a comment as fresh as today in regards to this item somewhere where someone's like, I think that guy's full of, whatever. He's just trying to be a scammer, even though I told them not to buy it, but nevertheless. And the reason being is because their opinion on that specific item is that it falls in line as follows. Now, there's information that I have or things that I've uncovered, and some of it doesn't even make TV. And when that happens, a lot of times it's not out there. And like for that exact episode, what's funny is I knocked the paint quality. Now, someone's like, well, Funko never worries about the paint quality. Well, we all say Panini doesn't care about the quality of their cards come off the line. Everybody has this opinion when it talks about manufacturers, right? But my point on that is that they wouldn't have let this one go. From the episode, you wouldn't have been able to tell how crude the paint was, how poorly it was done. And what most people don't know is that after the episode, I was even able to get the seller to let me open the item, open the box, and actually review it and go around and show. And we could see where there were like major issues on it that did not match up to the other ones that were in the marketplace. But again, people get that opinion. And so in that world right now, there's kind of I don't want to call it a witch hunt, but there's a little bit of the Funko collector is like, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And that happens because of the fact that the platform we're on and how it's presented to you, whether it's presented a year and a half after we filmed it, or it's presented from a standpoint that not all the information is provided, it can happen to be seen that way just because of that.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. You say witch hunt, and right away I think, well, the hobby's no stranger to witch hunt either. So it's nice to see there's consistency among different genres of collecting. How many appearances have you had now on Pawn Stars?
So it's the 75 plus range. I don't have an exact count on it. It's been over 75, 80 episodes. And we just filmed a new season of a new edition of the show, which is Pawn Stars Hits the Road. It's airing now. The guys actually went out and did buying events in different cities, and then they would call different experts out to the cities based on what people were bringing out to these events.
Right.
Which was really fun. And it's a fun take because you got to get them to come to your marketplace for, 3-4 days, host a buying event, meet everybody. They got on the road. It was really great for the crew. We always forget about, when they travel, if the three of them travel, speaking of Rick, Corey, and Chum, if they travel, there's 14 other people going with them. Camera.
Right. Yeah. The whole production crew. So let's talk about those guys now. I mean, Pawn Star, and I've been watching Pawn Stars since it started. Found it to be a very interesting show. It's entertaining. You've got Rick, the main owner of the shop. The old man who's since passed away, his father, his son Corey, and then his son Corey's buddy Chum. So that there's three of them still living. You got to know the old man a bit. What are these guys like to work with? Have you, and this is, what you don't know by watching the show. Have you become friends with these guys? Were you sad when the old man, as they called him, passed away? Did you go to his funeral? Are you pals with Rick? Did you go to his wedding? Or do you chum around with Chum, Lee, and Corey? Tell us a bit about the dynamic sort of away from the screen that we get to see.
Well, it's always funny because they always say, let me call my friend. Right. I got a friend. Let me call him. So the way I got involved, because I think that's important to say, is that we had a mutual customer who had been for years telling them that they should be using me. And ultimately that information got passed on. They made some wholesale changes. There was quite a few expert changes during the season that I came on. And in fact, you mentioned Steve Grad. In the interim between changes in the toy expert and pop culture expert and me coming in, Steve Grad evaluated a prop collection of Star Wars, like screen use Star Wars stuff that he actually did the evaluation for. So it's kind of funny because I jokingly say, no, there's 3 toy experts because Steve Grad was the second. But working with the guys is really unique. And when they brought me in, it was from that standpoint. So it really was a professional relationship, right? And I came in and got involved from that standpoint. When I got involved with them, I think I really took to Chum. He's really into sports betting. He's a little younger than I am, but still has a lot of the same interests and focuses. We talk about nerdy stuff as well as sports. Rick, being the smartest guy I've ever met before, when you're talking about someone who knows their stuff in the lane they're in, I mean, Rebecca Romney's the best expert on the show, and no one can change my mind. She is, and I agree. I believe that 100%. He doesn't need her. He's the book expert. He really doesn't. He knows his stuff. He also knows his pre-war and his American history. So it's amazing to just sit and listen to him talk and to be. So when I'm around Rick, I find opportunities to really talk to him about either those things, or he's also really heavy into politics, but I don't talk politics on these platforms, but it's neat to see his take, how he views things, how he sees things, and then obviously how he was. As far as the old man goes, I came in a really unique time. The old man had gotten sick, so I actually didn't film with him at all. I came at the end of a season. In fact, my premiere episode was the season finale, and it was a season he had filmed in, but he did not film that episode that I was on. And he had gotten sick and they had kept it quiet. And so when he passed, it was a very quiet thing. And they had kept it that way. And they wanted to keep it private. And I think that they did an incredible job in the day and time that we're in. So I've gotten to know, Rick. I've definitely gotten to know Chum. Chum and I have actually done things together. We do some things. We have some stuff down the pipeline that you can expect that probably at some card shows. You'll be seeing Chum and I making appearances at shows, either for buying events or him partnering with us at Gameday and actually being part of our footprint at a show because of our relationship. Corey's the outlier for me. Corey, I film with him. I don't really see him much beyond that. I also don't go hang out at the shop often. I don't do those things. So I don't run the time to be around those guys as much. It's purely a professional standpoint, but I've definitely become a lot more friendly with Chum. And, he and I have built a really good rapport and relationship. And I'll be honest with you, it shows on screen. Yeah. Our chemistry together is hands down easily the best of the three that I film with. Although Rick is a consummate professional. And like I said, he really, really gets what he's doing. So that's kind of how it's built with me. So not going to say that I'm friends. I can be the buddy, but what I can tell you is this, is that I respect each one of them for what they do and how they do it. And each one of them has their lane, the thing that they do well. And you know what? They've done a great job on that show to keep it rolling.
Yeah, no, for sure. I don't know how many seasons it's gone, but it keeps on going. And it's pretty, it's still a good show. How do they feel? I don't know if you can answer this or not. I forget who they use for sports cards now. For a while, they were using a guy named Jeremy who had a shop in Las Vegas. I know they've moved away from him now. How does the shop feel about sports cards in general? Is it an exciting sort of vertical for them, or is it like they would rather be doing memorabilia and Hollywood music sort of stuff?
I think the best stuff for TV is Hollywood memorabilia, game used items, things to that extent that really kind of like, for a television standpoint, they're a little more visual, right? A bat being on the counter is a lot more visual than there being a graded, Mickey Mantle, sure. Right? Yeah. The historical factor is the ultimate guideline for how they're casting items for the show. So when they're actually deciding if an item is actually going to be on the show, that's really what they're looking at. They're looking at what's the historical factor of it, what's important behind it, why, and is there a historical tie-in to it? Because those things matter the most. And I remember Daniel Walken, who was till recently the sports expert for the show with Memory Lane in California. Daniel did a Babe Ruth bat, right? And the historical relevance behind that item. And there's speculation out there as to what that item was. But what I can tell you is the historical aspect for the show, that's where the value is. So whenever they're looking at that stuff,
that's what's really that's what's really entertaining, right? Is when they get into the history side of things. And when the pawn shop employee, whether it's Rick or whoever, starts to spew that knowledge and talk about the item, and then they start putting those little graphic or text bubbles on the screen to round out the context. I do enjoy that aspect of it for sure. Sasha says right here, isn't the most watched Pawn Stars episode when Gary the Pokemon King brought in all his Charizards and they passed on the deal? It's now worth 10 times what he was asking for it. What can you tell us about that episode? I know you and I did touch on it earlier, so you have something to say about that. Yeah, round out some context on that the Pokemon episode, which I did manage to see myself.
Yeah, so it is the most watched episode. It's got multiple streaming platforms that have over 15 to 20 million views a piece on it. And I was lucky enough to be involved with that one. I'll give you some context on that. When Gary came in, Gary was that expert. He was that guy I told you about, right? He is the guy that knew everything about this stuff. He had a pretty good understanding of value, but Gary was more of one of those guys that he didn't understand like market trends. He just knew that he bought it. It had value today. He really liked it, which is what's made him likable. That's what's made him the Pokemon King, right? And that episode is ultimately what kicked it off for him. That episode was really unique, and I love talking about it because I think it's important from our standpoint in the hobby to understand this, that sometimes what we believe or what we think after the fact should have happened, you have to understand a lot of things, right? And the first thing is that during the episode, not everything that was evaluated was shown. There was more than what was there. In fact, there was 2 stacks, probably about 50 to 70 each, of ungraded raw shadowless Charizards, right? So there was already like these 2 massive stacks, the stuff that he didn't grade, right? Then you had the stack of PSA 10s, which represented 20% of the market. I don't care what business you're in. If you own 20% of the market share of something, you can change the complexity of the market by how you activate that, whether you sell it, hold it, keep, whatever, right? And that was a very important part of this episode because everybody's going, well, Rick should have made an offer because Rick didn't make an offer on it. Rick didn't want to buy it. Sometimes you got to be good at what you're good at. And Rick understood that this was something that probably was a little over the shop's head, and that they were going to have to lean on people like myself or even other sharps in that industry that even were stronger in the Pokemon market than I am, right? And to get involved with that. And then two, when you own a market share like that, you have to plan how you sell it if you're selling it. You can't just go put an auction up of 10, PSA 10 Charizards. Let's let the first one go. That'll never work. You'll water the market down and it'll cannibalize itself. So it had to move through the marketplace on a more peer-to-peer level. And that's time, and time is money. So when we look at that episode and we say, oh, well, they could have bought it and 10x their money at the peak of the market. Well, first off, they had to foreshadow that the market was going to 10x. And I can tell you on the day that we filmed that, there's not a person in that building, in the building next to me, or across the country that thought the market was going to boom like it did. There's nobody that forecasted it to be that big of a boom. They may have saw it upticking. That's kind of what happens with especially those 90s properties, and that's one of them. They kind of cycle back, and then they go away, and they cycle back. But it was a really unique position for them because they could not be so invested into that and then risk that they were going to have to sell it over a 2-year period. Right. It was too much time. I don't care how much money it was. It was too much time to try to sell that out to really maximize their profit. At the end of the day, they have to do that. They have lights, employees.
Of course. No, great stuff. Fun information. Nice to know a little bit about sort of behind the scenes. Colin Murray was in the shop last year. Didn't see any sports cards, and I haven't been in there for a couple of years, but I don't know that I've ever seen a sports card in my 3 or 4 visits to the show. Sasha says here, Rick is an expert in so many subjects, but as long as he doesn't do sports cards, the shop will never specialize in sports cards. And I think that's fair. It's not a sports card shop. It's a pawn shop. They're supposed to do a bit of everything, right? And they, for the most part, they do touch on most things. Brendan Ryan says that a lot of action-packed redemption autos, basketball cards that never got to circulation. That was a nifty episode. I don't remember that one myself, but very cool. Good to know that they did that. He also says here, didn't Rick say that modern sports cards are not worth the paper they are printed on? I mean, if he said that, he was wrong. As a blanket statement, it doesn't apply. But as a general statement, maybe 98% of the modern cards made are not worth the paper they're printed on. But there are certainly the outliers from there. And Dexflow says right here, Jeremy, Steve can appreciate my newest purchase, an AFA 80 Optimus Prime. So we're talking about the Transformers here. Maybe the Honus Wagner of Transformers being the Optimus Prime, right? What do you think of this purchase that Dexflow recently made?
It's definitely one of the staples in the marketplace when you're talking about Transformers. That was actually one of the items that I sold, was a sealed Optimus Prime. And the whole idea behind it was I got 1.5 times what it was selling in the market at the time because the guy wanted it so bad, because he went and graded it. It was one of the first ones to grade an 8.5. And in the toy world, an 80 is kind of like that high mark, and 85 is like, that's the benchmark you're shooting for. That's the BGS 9.5 number. That's the PSA 10 number, right? Because you don't 10 toys. Toys don't go 100. They don't. And so an 8.5 in the vintage toy market is very strong. 80 is very, very good. So that's an incredible purchase. That's something that definitely is one of those, in my opinion, that's a value collector move where you grab that and you hold it. But the marketplace right now is in a great time to buy, right? This is a very liquid market. If you're a liquid, you should be buying like you never have before. And you can continue to buy for, I believe, at least 6 more months, maybe 5 more months over that period. But
I was going to save this line of discussion for a little bit later, but you've introduced it. So why don't we do that now and just talk about, because I did tease in the description that, you've got some investment strategy, some tips for people based on some successful experience. Now, I've said 100 times, maybe more, I don't offer investment advice. I'll tell you what I'm buying and collecting. It's up to you if you want to. If you ask me what players I like or what cards I like, I'll tell you. But that's what I like. And if they don't do well for you, that's on you. I'm not advising anything. In this case, when you presented me the information the other day, I thought, this is information that I don't mind being shared on my channel, because I liked what you were saying in terms of, like, it made sense to me that you weren't just really forecasting, you're actually using logic to make some decisions. And it wasn't just based on, who are the hottest players right now. It was based more on economic circumstances versus, say, on field, court, or ice. So with that said, why don't you expand on that a little bit and talk about, where we're at in the market right now? Obviously, since the pandemic, since really early 2020, the hobby blew up, and then it's come back down to earth over the past, 6 to 9 months or so. And now we're going to move forward. There's a lot of people asking and wondering, when is the bottom of the hobby? When is the bottom going to be? The new bottom? Is it now? Is it 6 months from now? And what should we be doing right now? Should we get out now? Should, sell your cards now and maybe buy them back cheaper down the road, or hold on or keep buying? So with all that said, can you just sort of take us through your mindset, but please give us the historical context that you're using to forecast ahead?
Well, first off, I think it's important for people to understand that I started this at a very young age, right? And I use this one specific moment. I share this in Sports Card Hobby often, which was, I was an avid reader of Baseball America. And Baseball America, in the very back end, used to have a little section that would always talk about up and coming minor leaguers and stuff that was going on. And in 1991, right, you had some rookies that came out that they're not as big now, but at the time they were big names. And I mentioned one of them, Phil Plantier, and some of these guys. But the 92 All-Star Game was held in San Diego, which is where I grew up. And they do Fan Fest, which is a giant card show and memorabilia show. And it's very fun and something that they need to kind of bring it back to the era it was in the 90s, because it was amazing in the 90s. And I remember going around the show and buying every single Mike Mussina rookie out of the common boxes. I paid 15 cents a piece, 20 cents a piece for them. I bought every single one of the show. And I remember taking out a 100 count case completely full of Mike Mussina rookies out of FanFest. And it's 6 weeks later, right? And I see the comment that Chris has about Todd Van Poppel. While everyone else was buying him, I was off buying Mussina. And it was because they were talking about how he was going through the farm system, and there was things, and they were talking about specific things that I thought as a kid sounded like he'd have longevity. Well, he gets brought up. He goes off. I think he goes 8-1 or something like that over his first 9 appearances, 10 appearances. He won just a gross amount of games, and everybody started talking about him. And at that time, as a kid, I'm 14, 15 years old, and I'm turning around and selling these cards for $15 a piece to dealers. Right? So I started then. I think it's important to share that, because I've always kind of really looked for opportunities in the market. And that's how I advise when I talk investment. So every single Monday on our podcast, the Game Day Huddle, we have a little segment, not long, where I'll talk about investment, whether it's a buy, sell, or hold concept, right? What you should be doing in the marketplace. And throughout the last year of doing that, there's been some major home runs hit. There's been a lot of sustainability, and there's been things that can happen. And it's stuff that can happen in almost any market. People don't realize that this stuff can be applied towards almost any market when it comes to the world of collectibles. Just the sports card world has real world time and information, things that happen. Joe Mixon scores 5 touchdowns. People want Joe Mixon rookies. These things happen, right? So if you can forecast some of this stuff, you can see some of these things that are happening, or some of the things that might be a downturn for it, you can take advantage of it. And one I shared with you when we talked before a little bit was in regards to Luka Doncic, right? Everybody had invested so heavy into Luka. They had gotten, I don't want to say they're upside down, but I want to say that they definitely kind of got where they bought real heavy and bought high. And a lot of people didn't know how to get out of it. All they kept saying, I kept hearing this constantly. Someone would come up, they would look to sell a card to our shop or another dealer, and they would say, well, I bought this for X and I can't lose that amount of money. I can't lose that amount of money. And I kept hearing it said over and over and over again. And it dawned on me that most of these people that were buying in the marketplace and buying at that high level didn't know how to correct themselves in the market. And that's with hedging. And the way you hedge an item is you got to go out. If you bought 10 big Luka rookies and you bought them at the peak of the market, and you're now looking at it and they're down and you're like, dang it, I spent way too much then. Because we all feel we overpaid, even though we paid market value at the time. But that's a whole nother, we can have a whole nother, discussion on that. However, in this space, what you can do, and this is what my advice was, is to go in and buy at that lower tier of the market when you see an opportunity. And the opportunity I saw was, I thought the Mavericks were going to make the playoffs last year. I thought that the Mavericks were going to actually make a playoff run. And if they won a series, which they did, I felt that Luka would take a huge advantage of that. So if you bought Luka those last 10 days, 15 days of the NBA season, which is when I was advising this, go out and buy everything Luka that you already overpaid for, and then come back and buy it again. And then when he wins a playoff series, sell all of it. Because the whole idea is to hedge yourself out, to mid yourself out, so that way you can either break even, or in some cases, some people made some money off of it.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like dollar cost averaging your investment down, just so that when you do get out, you're going to make money on the stuff you bought cheaper, which will then help drive down the cost of the stuff you paid more for earlier on. Yeah, it's an interesting strategy. Brendan Ryan throws out I think an important question on the strategy. Basically says, do you chalk that up to instinct or analysis?
I would definitely say that I spent a lot of time of analysis. One example that I can give you, and again, this is all stuff people can go back and fact check me on, so I have no problem saying this stuff. 2 weeks before the Mac Jones boom last year, I looked at the Patriots schedule. I saw how people were spending money on the 21 product class and buying boxes of stuff. And I said, they're grasping for someone to take the lead here. And he has an opportunity to do it because he's going to be the biggest story. He's the guy that came in behind Tom Brady. He's the guy, even though there was other people there, he's the new guy that came in behind Tom Brady. He's the guy that they're going to look at. Everybody's going to have comparisons. They're going to discuss that. And so I'm like, if he goes and he wins these next 2 games, there's going to be a big boom in the market. So that day, to me, that was the bottom of his market. So I went out and I said, look, go in and buy Mac Jones right now. Buy Mac Jones like crazy. And there wasn't a ton of stuff out, but the Don Russ rated rookie was out, right? And then you had the gold hollow that came out of the retail product, the retail factory set product that came out, that was also another card that was on the market. Like there was a few. I was like, buy Mac Jones like crazy. Buy as much as you can because you'll never be able to buy it as cheap. Then 2 weeks later, I came back on our podcast and I'm like, now sell your Mac Jones and do it quickly because you're never going to be able to sell them for cheaper. Now, I was a little wrong with that concept, but my idea was we've already made you money. Don't get greedy. Right? Find the opportunities in the market, take advantage of it. And that was a really good example where you can do that. And if you forecast, you look ahead, you can see these things. Like if I came on today and said one thing, okay, we just saw that Tyrese Maxey went down with 3 to 4 week injury on a fracture in his foot, right? We all know that's 6 weeks back. That's 4 weeks back to the court, 2 weeks back of adjustment, trusting himself, whatever it is. He gets to the playoffs, though, all that team's going to talk about is Tyrese Maxey. So now that Maxey's hurt, as much as this is unfortunate, this is the time to buy because everybody's going to be selling off. Now, I'd wait a week because there's going to be a lot flooded into the market right now. Let them all lower the prices across the board to each other, buy him at the bottom, and then wait for him to get to the playoffs.
So let me ask you this. There's the baseball player, I think it was Tatis, who was suspended for PEDs, right?
Yep.
And he's no slouch of a player. He's going to take some time off and come back. What's your thoughts on him? Because I don't follow baseball today, and I thought to myself, well, now's the time to buy Tatis. Everyone's going to offload it because we have a very short, generally the hobby has a short-term outlook on things. I have a longer-term outlook. So I'm thinking, and I didn't go and do it, but I thought there's probably some people who are a little savvier than most who are probably thinking, well, yeah, maybe now's the time to be buying him. What were your thoughts on that when he was found to be using PEDs and received his suspension?
Well, first off, I'm a little bit of a homer here, so let's forecast that. I'm a Padres fan, so he was definitely one of my guys, right? With that said, the marketplace looks at these PED violations a little bit differently now. If you need any example of that, is that in the world of fantasy, everybody was chomping at the bit as soon as DeAndre Hopkins came back off the suspension list to be able to play this year. Everybody was willing to make a deal for DeAndre Hopkins because, again, it's about what you've done for me lately in the modern world. And I believe that that's what's happening here. Tatis took such a dip in the market that it's a very, very safe opportunity. You are not going to get yourself leveraged into anything too heavily to not be able to get yourself out of it, if that makes sense. And I have a very simple play for him. When he comes and he hits his 10th home run since he's been back, it'll all be forgotten.
Yeah, for sure.
So where was he when we forgot about it? Because that's where I think we'll go. Do I think he'll boom?
You just got muted somehow, Steve. If you maybe your mic disconnected somehow. You might need to pop out and pop back into the studio. All right, so we've lost Steve for a second. This did happen. This happened earlier in training, so I somewhat expected this, and he'll be back in a minute. We'll wait for him. Currency Project says dollar cost averaging in cards. I use it myself. Yeah, it's a good way. I think that was a good strategy that Steve outlined. He's back. Let's see. Can we hear you now?
I think we got it fixed, and I do apologize.
No worries.
So to finish up my thought on that is just purely simple, which is Tatis is a good investment. I don't want to say he's safe. There's a little bit of volatility there that's possible, but I do believe that it is an opportunity in the market right now to buy. He's not my number one to buy in baseball right now. Like, I'm not advising to buy that. I actually forecast prospects a lot, so I'm more about the prospect and getting you value when the prospect makes it to the major leagues, which I believe is important.
Okay.
But he's definitely one you'll be able to make some money on once that 10 home run plateau happens.
Okay, so 2 comments. The first one, we're going to come back to Tatis in a second, but I want to go to Chris C, because you talked about the fact that you like to you look at prospects. There's a Cardinals prospect who's going to be huge. Some say Jordan Walker, but his autos are ridiculously priced. Can you just take like a couple seconds and address Jordan Walker?
So Jordan Walker is an incredible player. He's got a couple of things that don't go well for him. One, he's not going to be good in the media. And we've come to find out that in sports, it's very important for them to be good in the media. 2, he's coming into a team that is losing some superstars, losing Yachty, losing Pujols. Those guys are kind of taking a little of that allure away from that team. So here come the new guard and the new guys. And right now, the baseball player, like collector, wants to be in the realm of I want to see this guy do it. So Jordan Walker's a very good investment. However, not now. If you bought Jordan Walker 8 months ago, that was when you were supposed to buy Jordan Walker. See, I believe that this is all timing is incredibly important. The guy on the Cardinals you should be buying right now is Nolan Gorman. While everyone else is buying up Jordan Walker, you should be buying Nolan Gorman because he's the guy that still has tremendous upside and you can get him cheap enough.
Okay, there we go. And so Bonkers has a comment here. It says, when a baseball player is connected to PEDs, their card values never hold over time, from Bonds, McGuire, Sosa to A-Rod. These players' cards compared to other players with similar stats aren't close. I think he's right about that. And we were talking about Tatis thinking, 10 homers in, it'll be mostly forgotten. And I seem to I know what Bonkers is saying. I mean, this is factual what Bonkers is saying. But something in my head makes me think that it's just a little bit different from what was going on in the 80s and 90s and the way society viewed these people to today. And again, I don't know what PEDs everyone was using, but I think steroids is a pretty strong word and it has some negative connotation to it. I don't know if Tatis was using steroids or some over-the-counter medication that caused there to be traces of it in his system. I just don't know. So my question is there a difference, Steve, between how the players on this post that we see on our screen right now are assessed and judged versus how Tatis will be assessed and judged for his use of PEDs?
Well, to me, I think it's incredibly simple, which is the sports writers that were writing then are starting to not be our sports writers now, right? Those guys drug those names through the mud. Those guys lied to every single one of those sports writers. They told them stories. They made up things. And every single one of these sports writers went out and put this information out there. This guy's not using, he's clean, he's this, he said that, and made them kind of look bad. So when it came to that they actually did use, those guys buried them. They wanted to. And a guy like Bonds, who was very unlikable, those things really, really mattered. The thing you're running into here is that the use of PEDs now is not like it was then. The advantage to gain now is getting back healthy quicker, not to overperform everybody on the field. Nobody is Lenny Dykstraing it up and just getting absolutely jacked, and Brady Anderson and these guys that we all know that like really just went over the top. That's not happening. Don't get me wrong. Do I think I know there's steroids in baseball. Like I know, and there, that's going to be the case for quite some time. Someone's always going to look for a way to beat the system. Sure. But in the case of like a situation with Tatis, I mean, I did my research. I'm a Padres fan. What he used in his hometown, in his home country, actually does contain traces of the drug in which he did test positive for. And what he tested positive for was a very small fraction of it. Do I believe his story? I'd like to. Can I? No, because I've been taught over the years that these guys lie all the time.
Yeah, it's the whole like the boy who cried wolf, but it's transferable between people now. It's,
right.
When one person ruins it for the other. Adam Holgate says Tatis is so young, lots of time for people to forgive and forget. And I think now it's a lot more likely that will happen, compared to if it happened in the year 1999 or 2000 or 2001, exactly, which was a lot closer to the players that were on that list that Bonkers put up. So, okay. Great stuff. Good comments from the chat. I've still got about 5 noted that I want to get to. We'll see if we have time because we're already deep in, Steve, and we haven't even gotten through my show notes completely. So we're gonna touch on 2 more topics for sure. Let's take a moment and talk about Gameday Sports Cards. But what I want to talk about with Gameday is because I teased it in the video description here that you have some great ideas on how to grow the hobby using trade nights. And I think that's an important aspect of the hobby. And I'd like you to just share your thoughts on that and what your strategy is. And I guess just tie that into what you bring to Gameday, why Jimmy brought you on in the first place, and how it's playing out for you guys over there over the past several months.
Well, when I came into Gameday, I think Jimmy's focus is to really find an opportunity in the hobby to connect with the collector community. He spoke with me about community since the first time I ever talked to him. And it was so important. And that was one of the allures. I had an opportunity. I kind of could have gone and did anything I wanted. I joked around that when I became available in the market, I was kind of like the top free agent, right? Because I could kind of go do whatever I wanted. But when I connected with Jimmy, I thought there was a real passion there to find a way to do that. And that's what he empowered me to do. So when I came in with some marketing background and event experience. I've done event production, produced conventions, been involved with a bunch of them over the years. And even going back to, I'm a DJ by trade and had a DJ background and did mobile events. I've done over 1,500 wedding receptions. So the thing is like when you've done these events, you kind of understand flow and concept and all that. And that's what we really looked at. So we came in and I said, I think there's an area of the marketplace that really could use some help. And that was in the trade night concept at the card shows, because they essentially would just like, okay, there's a room open. Feel free to go in there and trade, guys. Well, there was no real vibe. There was no real feel to the room. There was no real elements that really felt like they could work. But every show producer wanted to charge somebody to have their name attached to it. Well, I wanted there to be value for that. Thought that was important. So if TAG, for example, sponsors a trade night and we're involved with that, I want to make sure that we give TAG value, right? And I think that that's incredibly important. And then 2, end user, what does it feel like to go to these things? Are they fun? Or is it just an extension of your day? And I felt in some aspects it was an extension of your day. So we wanted to find ways to really vibrant it up, make it different, do those things.
Yeah. So it's funny you mentioned, and you mentioned tag. And the reason I'm bringing that up now is because at the Del Mar show just a few weeks ago, I was there with tag. We were set up, and we did not sponsor the trade night. I think you guys sponsored. I think Gameday sponsored the trade night, but you managed to do something for tag that was really cool in the trade night. And I like, why don't you explain what that was? And I'm not, this isn't just about tag, because you could have done it for any company that was there, but you did do it with us. And just talk about like what you did, why you did it, and how it was received. Because I mean, we were very happy that you did it, I must say.
Well, when we do an event with one of these event producers, I always look at how I can add value. I've always thought that. In fact, I've taught my employees over the years that any employee who's ever worked for me, I always say, how can you be plus? Like where can you elevate your experience and be better for the company and for the consumer, or whoever it is. So whenever we do something, I always look for opportunities. And in this case, Tag was a sponsor of the convention, but not the trade night. They were not solicited by us to be a contributor to prizes because they were already spending so much money with the show. But when they came and approached me and said, hey, we would love to give some stuff away, of course I'm going to take care of one of the sponsors for the show and make sure that they get showcased properly. So they went and grabbed some stuff. They brought some slabs. They brought them over. They handed them off to us as if, hey, give them away. And in most of the trade nights, what happens? You get the hit, and then, the guy sits there and reads off the names, or just, gives it away to one person, and then that's it. We found that wasn't the best example to do your giveaways. So I actually killed raffle tickets. We don't do raffle tickets at our trade nights. Instead, I have interactive ways that I participate with the crowd and get the crowd to participate with either the vendor and or other people who are there attending trade night. It's a social thing. So I want it to be social. So what I did is when they gave those to us, I went up to do a giveaway, and I did a giveaway, and that was actually for our friends at Gameday Sports Cards, who were gracious and gave us some really incredible stuff that night. And we were doing a giveaway for Gameday. And at the end of the giveaway for Gameday, I showed that Tag had given me a bunch of slabs and told everybody, we're going to be playing a game of tag, and then we'll be coming around in just a little bit and playing the game, and then left it at that. So I closed with that, and the group from Tag is standing there like, wait, what? We're doing what? My team was going like, wait, what? The Union Marketplace team was like, wait, what just happened? And everybody kind of comes down to me, and they're like, what are we doing? You didn't tell us about this. We had no idea. And I'm like, I just came up with this. And what we did is we created a fun way to give away those slabs to where we tied in a social media aspect for them, which then gave value to the show because the show got more social media mentions, gave value to Tag as a sponsor because it was hedged around them. And then we got Talent Sports Cards as an influencer involved, and he did all the production and the video for it. And our team, the Union Marketplace team, went around and played tag with the slabs. And it was a very fun, interactive thing, and it created a social media campaign, something that I told Tag that doing events in the future with, we will continue this concept that whenever we do something with tag, we will play a game of tag, and we'll continue to do that because that to me is unique to that experience. When you were at that trade night, you got to experience that, and it was fun and interactive. And the next trade night we do, I'm going to try to find something new and interactive to do again.
Yeah, I mean, I was in the room. I don't think I was in the room for that game, but I will say that trade night, what I liked about it was super bright in the room. It was a bright room, lots of light, and the vibe was good. It just had there's music playing. People were having a couple of drinks. They were chilled. They had cards out. It was just, it felt, I don't know what I guess it felt like the way Steve Johnston brands a trade night and plans a trade night versus, like you said, just a room with tables and people putting their cards out. Obviously, the trade night concept is still, for as far as the events after hours at card shows goes, is relatively new, 5 years old or so, but it's taking off and now it's evolving, similar to the way breaking evolved, group breaks evolved over time, right? They took 15 years to get to where they are today. Trade nights, I'm sure, will continue to evolve. And if you're at the center of that, I think that's pretty cool. I can't wait to see what else you come up with. Going to go to a couple comments now that are coming in on the chat here. Ultimate Pastime, that's our boy Mark right there, says Mark Neiman says Game Day always throws great trade nights. Oh, thank you, Mark. Always good to see you in the chat and when we do run into each other or on the show. Chris C, this is a bit off topic, but I'm going to bring it up anyway, since I think collectors would greatly benefit from mandatory print runs to know how much product is out there. Sealed wax seems this year to be way up in production, especially Panini stuff. Chris, I don't think they will ever share. I mean, who knows with Fanatics coming in if they change that, but under current management and leadership, I don't think they'll ever divulge print runs for all products. I just don't think that's going to happen. Anthony Scott says, when are you going to run the trade night in Chicago? Well, I don't know if he's talking about the Spectacular or if he's talking about the National, but the National trade night, that's already been claimed by Card Collector 2 and Jimmy from Roadshow Sports Cards. They kind of have that under wraps. But is Anthony talking about the Sports Spectacular? I'm not sure. That's a different show in Chicago.
So we will actually be partnering with LUTX for their show, I believe, in March, and producing the trade night for them at that event. So we will be doing another event. Now, this will be our second time partnering with LUTX on a trade night. We did one here in Las Vegas, and we will be coming back with one for them then. And so, yeah, so it's coming up. I believe it's March. I have to look at the calendar exactly because we've got other shows coming up. But I believe it's in March. So we will be out in Chicago and hosting a trade night out there. So there's your answer.
All right, good stuff. Good stuff. Okay, there's one more topic. We're running out of time here. There's one more topic that I teased on the video description, and it's basically populations versus comparables, pops versus comps, and these are two metrics that the hobby uses to assess value, assess scarcity, assess demand, cost, all these things for certain cards. And right now, there's so much attention given to both of them, really. But you had some thoughts on this and where it was kind of going to move to in the future. Is one more important than the other historically, today, and in the future? How do they rank versus each other? And what sort of insights do you have on pops versus comps?
Well, my first take is that, and this is, I'll say this first, and that is, it's my belief that in 2 years, we will talk about pop before we talk about the comp at shows. It'll be that prevalent in the marketplace, and it should be. Right now, the investment advice that I'm giving to people are more based around what this metric is. So the question that was asked earlier tells you even further how I get involved in the metric on it, is that I actually think it's so important to really be aware of what your pop count is on what you are buying and what you have, that should actually be an investment game plan if you're buying now. And the reason I say that is because when you're buying right now, you need to be aware of how much of something actually exists to be out in the marketplace. We talked about the 20% of the market earlier of the Charizard. So I'm saying take cards that are numbered 50 or less, high grade. Those should be prioritized in your buying. If you're buying from an investment standpoint, whether it is value investment or it is current buy to flip investment, right? If you are doing either of those things, you should be very conscious of whether. Now, this isn't a new concept, but opening your mind to it on a regular basis, I think, is incredibly important, right? And then also being aware of when something is a numbered card that is, for example, one I can use. We sold recently on one of our live streams on Whatnot a Tristan Cassis 2020 Bowman Chrome Purple that was numbered to 299. Now it was graded an 8.5. Now you look at that and you say, "Oh, well, that card, it's graded an 8.5. It's a purple." That's what people think. No, it was a pop one, none higher, because it happened to be that the purple from that year's cards do not grade very high. There's something that happened in the process with the purple that are keeping those from grading very high.
What was the total grade population, though? Like, it's a pop one at 8.5. Was it the only one ever graded out of 299?
That is the only one that was in their grading system.
So not only were there none higher, there were also none lower.
Right. So when you're looking at that, all of a sudden you're looking at a card that there isn't a comp for. You can't base that. It is the only one that exists. So finding those opportunities in the market, I think, are key. So I've been telling people, hey, buy the silvers, the first year silvers in Prism for both basketball and football. Buy those first years that are cards that are low pop, right? Cards that are less than 50 population, you should definitely be targeting. 2, if they're numbered and they're liquid players, that's also another one. Those are the 2 elements that you really should be looking at. But utilizing that pop report in your buying is going to make you sharp, because that's going to help protect your investment. Because while the pop is low there, that's going to give you an ability to at least be in the minor group of people that have that card graded, rather than being into a card that everybody has, that at any one time a group could go and throw it down on the market, water the market down, and drive the value of that card down.
Yeah. No, well said. I agree with all that. I'm going to bring up one of Chris's comments here, which makes a lot of sense to me. He says, I don't agree with comps. If one person sells something for 30% less than the last sale, it doesn't mean I have to do the same. And I mean, he's right about that. Somebody might need quick cash, and it's on a platform that is tracked by the data services, and it now becomes the latest comp, and it's 30% discount. It's, the general public who researches these data points doesn't necessarily know what the specific circumstances were around that transaction, that disposition at that price. Another issue I have with comps is that if we're only ever willing to pay the last comp, prices will never move. They'll just never move. Latest comp is the permanent price. So you have to have a bit of, I don't know if it's just some be a little bit brave to pay more than a comp, or, to be able to set a record on a card. The other thing about comps that, for me at least, I put a lot more stock into them when they are for what I call a commodity card. A card that's trading every day, no problem. A card that isn't rare nor scarce. I'm gonna use the comps in my decision making to purchase or not purchase that item. It's gonna weigh a lot more heavily than a card that you never see come up for auction or come available at a card show or anything like that. So I think comps have their place, but population, like you said, and we're so far into the grading era now that I don't listen. I'm not going to say most cards are graded, but many cards are certainly graded. Mm-hmm. That now you kind of know, especially for cards that are, say, 5 years old and older, the populations aren't going to spike significantly anymore. That spike took place over the past 30 or so years. So populations, I'm with you. I'm with you, Steve. I think population is much more important moving forward than the overall comp. Especially when it comes to the rare cards, because in many cases there is not a comp for you to hang your hat on anyway.
Well, and I think that what you're touching on when we talk about the comp too, one element that most of us forget about, most of us miss, is also availability in the market. I don't know how many times someone will come and they'll say, well, the last one of these sold. And I go, cool. How many are available to buy today? Even at auction. How many are available right now? And you go and look and there's none available. You tell me that it's worth the last comp. When we're talking about this stuff, the comps should just be a base guideline like you're utilizing it. I think your example of utilization of that should be the industry standard. If it is a card that is in high population that trades on a regular basis, should probably go ahead and do that on a regular basis. And I'll use the flip side of that. What happens with the card that sells way over comps? Because I will tell you that after Joe Burrow went to the Super Bowl, we were in Atlanta at Culture Collusion. We had a NT booklet, football relic number 10 of 10, Justin Herbert auto, right? That card I sold on the Whatnot platform from that show for $20,000. That comp does not exist. The Joe Burrow's highest comp for that same card, that same booklet, was $7,900 just after the Super Bowl, right? Sometimes availability of an item in the market, that is the only National Treasures football relic booklet number 10 of 10 out there in the marketplace to exist. That comp happens, but it's not available for your data collection. So a lot of times I think that that's very speculative. I think the problem we're running into right now is that the old guard was so stuck on how we followed Beckett monthly that we believe that the price is, there's a price point in the market and the price is exactly that. And the old guard tries to live and die by that rather than being much aware of what the marketplace holds. And I think having an understanding of how much is out there to actually buy, what are you selling against? What is your marketplace selling against? I think that's a really key ingredient that most people are missing.
Yeah, no, for sure. When we talk about the, the Jordan 86 Fleer is a good one to use for this example. There's 320 or so PSA 10s. I recently heard another one was awarded a 10. That's the population, but a significant portion of those are likely locked away, especially today now that we're back in that 180 to 200K range for them. A lot of those are locked away. They're not going to see the light of day, so they're not available. Yes, the population is 320, but what the amount of cards that are like turning over that are going to be available, like what percent is actually turned over in a year? I call that the float. That's what's actually available, and the float is going to be a percentage of the population. So I don't know, that's the language I'm using for it. And it's, it's like the 52 Topps Mickey Mantle. There's a lot of those in graded slabs. It's not a rare card. You can find one anytime, but even the authentics, even the PSA ones sell for like 15,000 plus for a mangled version of the card, missing, with paper loss on the front around the border where the tape was. And there are some cards where population doesn't even matter because it's on, well, we're talking about one, if not the most iconic card ever when I mentioned that one.
Right.
So, but again, there's nuance to all this. Pops and comps, both important, but neither one the end all be all, especially because it's incomplete information as far as, well, both are incomplete. Comps are incomplete no matter what source you're using, and pop is incomplete because of crack and resubmit. So a couple of great comments coming in. I'm going to go to this one here from an unidentified Facebook user. So I'm going to read this. Stevie says, that comp argument only works on private sale. In an auction that's legit and without fake bids, then that's what the value is, basically what people are willing to pay. But in a private sale, you could get someone that needs cash, so a discount is there, or a buy it now for cheap as well. That's exactly true. I don't know what argument only works in a private sale. Maybe it's just the comp argument will only work as a negotiating tactic. Comps are good. I think comps, it really depends if they benefit the buyer or the seller more. But this particular comment, I have no issue with it. It all makes good sense to me. Does it make sense to you before I move on to the next one?
No, I think it does. And I think that point is there. The only thing that I will tell you is that some people will bid in an auction based on what they are seeing a relative comp to be. And I do think it's important to understand that that's always the person that says, well, I just got outbid. The last comp was this. I hear that all the time. I just got outbid. The last comp was this. Right. That person is just so stuck on what the comp was. And I'll jokingly say, like, people would come in all the time. I remember people coming in the store and saying, well, this is worth X. Well, no, it's not. I can show you that it sold recently for X, Y, and Z. It's closer to this. However, watch this. And I did it one day. I took a little trinket off the counter, took a picture of it, posted on eBay, put $10,000 on it and said, do you want to buy that? I'm only asking $3 in store. But someone has it up for $10,000 to show and illustrate to that person that we're still in, and I told you this, the Wild West of this industry. In the hobby of collectibles, we're really still in kind of like the dinosaur era, where a lot of this has not developed itself enough to really be honed in to say these are the standards.
Right.
We're going by a baseline, not a guideline.
Yeah, I agree for sure. Diamond Pocklington says, when I buy high-end cards, it has to be the best pop personally. So I think he means the highest grade. That's a nice position to be in. I always pick, where I can afford, and then that'll be, I'll try and find the nicest copy for that grade that's in my budget for that card. which is interesting because it may not be my overall what I can afford, but I have a budget for that specific card, and then I have other budget within what I can afford for other cards because I never only want one card at a time. Let's see what else. Oh, and Chris makes it, very just a simple but true comment. Pop counts are inaccurate because they don't count if someone sends in the same card to PSA like 3 times. Many cards will resub to get 10s. Yeah, that's what I was saying before, the pop and resub game, which, I mean, I used to think that and I've said it on the show probably 2 years ago, I thought they were probably overinflated the pop counts by, I don't know, 3 to 8%. Now I think it's like 30 based on what I'm learning about just how much, crack and resub actually goes on. Okay.
You know where that matters? That matters in the low pop cards, because when it is a low pop, which is my advice in telling you that cards that are numbered to 25 or 10 or that are just not ever going to generate a lot of pop count, that's exactly where that's going to matter. And that's where you're going to be on a winning side.
Yeah. No, well said. And good insights throughout, man. We're at an hour 40. We're going to end this episode. I have another show starting in 5 minutes after hours with my buddy Sam Genova, who was with me at the expo. And we're just I got my stacks of cards here that I'm going to share and have a chill out after hours episode. We'll start that on the channel here in about 5 minutes. Sam, if you are watching, you can head into the studio and I'll see you over there in a few minutes. But Steve, listen, I think we are, as I just said, we are going to wrap up. Man, great insights. You're a great guest, and we'll definitely welcome back again. We'll have you in the future on the show again. So I want to thank you for joining us, and thank you for the chat, for all really great I gotta say, I watch my share of content, Steve. Nobody has a chat like Sports Cards Live does, where just the quality of comments and the thoughtfulness behind them. I don't see it anywhere else. And like I said, I watch a lot. I'm talking about live streams. I see a lot of great comments on a lot of channels afterwards. But as far as during a live, nobody beats Sports Cards Live's chat. So thanks, everybody, for that. I see a lot of thank yous coming through right now. Stukes, you see someone new every day. Thank you for that, Stukes, and great to have you. Welcome to Sports Cards Live. Diamond, great to see you. Mr. Pocklington, Brendan Ryan, Mark Santucci will be there for after hours. Adam Holgate, really appreciate that. Steve, thanks again for joining. Final word to you, and then we'll end this.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on. It's been awesome. And, you're right. You have a very educated chat. And I think that that's incredibly important to have in this hobby. People that are discussing the hobby in a positive facet. And you're doing a great job with it, Jeremy. So keep it up.
Thanks. I appreciate that, Steve. Thanks again. Thank you, Chris. Thanks, Anthony Scott. See your comments there, everybody. We will be back. Give us a couple of minutes. The link is on the channel. You'll see it there for After Hours with Sam. We'll be back. I can go fill my water, and we'll keep on going for tonight on the channel. So, Steve, thanks again, everybody. Hope to see you shortly after. Purple Haze, I see you there. Thank you so much. Anthony Scott, thank you so much. This episode is over.